You never expect your own bedroom to show up on an adult website. I was sitting in my office chair at midnight on a Thursday, scrolling through random videos like any other insomniac with a reliable internet connection and questionable judgment about bedtime routines. I'd clicked on something titled Innocent Brunette's First Time because the thumbnail looked promising enough. Just another way to waste time before attempting sleep that wouldn't come anyway due to work stress and pre-wedding anxiety. What I didn't expect was to recognize the gray striped wallpaper immediately. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. That wallpaper. The same pattern I'd stared at every morning for 2 years while Clara got ready for work, applying her makeup with the precision of someone preparing for a performance. The same vertical lines that had become so familiar, they'd faded into background noise of domestic routine, like the humming of our refrigerator or the sound of traffic outside our apartment window. The same crooked curtains hanging over our bedroom window, because Clara always forgot to straighten them after opening them each morning, despite my gentle reminders that attention to detail mattered in all aspects of life. The same corner of our queen-size bed with the wooden headboard I'd assembled myself 3 months after we moved in together, cursing the Swedish instructions and missing hardware that required 2 separate trips back to the furniture store. My finger froze over the pause button like my brain had encountered a fatal error and needed to restart. The room was unmistakably ours. Every detail matched with photographic precision. The small chip in the paint near the closet door where I'd accidentally hit it with a vacuum cleaner during one of my weekend cleaning sessions. The way the afternoon light streamed through the window at exactly this angle when the sun reached its peak position. The blue ceramic lamp on the nightstand that Clara had insisted on buying, despite my protests that it clashed with our carefully coordinated color scheme. Even the positioning of our furniture was identical, down to the slight angle of the dresser that we'd never quite managed to push flush against the wall due to an irregularity in the floorboards. And then she walked into frame, my fiancée, my untouched bride, my personal sermon on patience and virtue. Clara Whitmore, daughter of Father Richard Whitmore, the woman who'd made me wait 28 months for our wedding night, because purity was a gift from God, and intimacy should be saved for the sacred bond of marriage, and good things come to those who wait for God's timing. Funny how purity looks better in high definition. I watched her perform acts I'd been told were saved for marriage, with a man I'd never seen before. A stranger who apparently knew our bedroom more intimately than I did after 2 years of respectful restraint and patient courtship. He was older than me, maybe 35, with the kind of confident movements that suggested this wasn't his first time directing this particular type of scene. He had graying temples and expensive-looking equipment that indicated professional rather than amateur involvement. His camera technique was smooth. His lighting was expertly arranged, and he moved around our bedroom with the familiarity of someone who'd spent considerable time planning shot angles and optimal positioning. The timestamp in the corner read 3 months ago, 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. I remembered that week vividly, my business trip to Chicago for a server migration project that had kept me away for 5 consecutive days, working 16-hour shifts to ensure minimal downtime for our client's e-commerce platform. She'd texted me every night during that trip, telling me how much she missed me, how she was spending time with her prayer group and reading scripture to feel closer to God while I was gone. She'd sent photos of herself reading devotionals in our living room, looking appropriately wholesome and lonely. Technically, I suppose she was on her knees during some of those photos. But this wasn't prayer, and the only scripture being recited involved taking the Lord's name in vain, repeatedly and with considerable enthusiasm. I sat there for exactly 17 minutes, watching my future wife violate every principle she'd claimed to hold sacred. The technical quality was surprisingly professional. Multiple camera angles, professional lighting setup, crystal-clear audio that captured every sound with studio-quality precision. This wasn't some spontaneous moment of weakness captured on a phone camera. This was a carefully planned production with professional equipment and practiced performers who clearly knew what they were doing. The rational part of my brain, the part that debugged code and solved network problems for a living, started analyzing details automatically. The camera work was smooth and deliberate, suggesting tripod mounts and planned positioning. The lighting was even and flattering, indicating external light sources rather than natural window light. The audio had that crisp quality that comes from external microphones rather than built-in camera recording. Most importantly, Clara wasn't acting like someone caught in a moment of passion or making an impulsive mistake. She was performing with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where the cameras were positioned and what angles would work best. She was giving directions. She was suggesting different positions. She was clearly the person in charge of this production. I didn't rage. I didn't throw anything across the room or punch walls like men do in movies when they discover their women have betrayed them. I didn't call her immediately or drive to the church where she volunteered 3 evenings a week to demand an explanation or dramatic confrontation. Instead, I closed the video with clinical detachment, opened a new folder on my desktop, and named it Honeymoon Footage .mp4 with the same methodical approach I brought to organizing work files. Then I went back to the website and started downloading everything I could find, because if there's one thing my IT background had taught me, it was the importance of proper backup procedures and comprehensive data collection before drawing any conclusions. The next morning, Clara hummed while making coffee, same as always. She wore her favorite Sunday dress, pale blue with tiny white flowers, the kind that screamed wholesomeness and had probably been specifically chosen for its ability to make her look like she belonged in a church bulletin advertisement for youth ministry programs. Her dark hair fell in careful waves around her shoulders, and she'd already applied the subtle makeup that made her look like she'd been blessed with naturally rosy cheeks and lips that had never known anything more scandalous than communion wine and innocent goodnight kisses. "Sleep well?" she asked, kissing my cheek with the same lips that had been quite busy with her mysterious visitor 3 months ago. "Like a baby," I said, watching her pour cream into my mug with the same hands that had been quite busy with tasks that definitely weren't covered in any church manual I'd ever read. She smiled that pure, innocent smile that had convinced me she was different from every other woman I'd known. The smile that had made me believe in second innocentes and redemption stories and all the other romantic notions that seemed plausible when delivered by someone who looked like she'd stepped out of a Norman Rockwell painting, celebrating small-town American values. "I'm excited about dress shopping today," she said, settling into her chair across from me with her own coffee mug, the one with God's Daughter printed in elegant script that her mother had given her for her last birthday. "Mom thinks we should look at the vintage boutiques downtown. She found this amazing place that specializes in traditional styles." "Sounds perfect," I replied, taking a sip of coffee and wondering if traditional styles included anything suitable for someone with her particular area of expertise. "White dress, right?" "Of course." She laughed like I'd made a joke. "What else would I wear? Can you imagine me in anything else?" I nodded thoughtfully, watching her butter her toast with the same careful precision she brought to everything else in her carefully constructed life. "What else, indeed?" "You seem quiet this morning," she observed, tilting her head with that concerned expression that had charmed me into proposing 8 months ago, during what I thought was a romantic picnic by the lake. "Everything okay at work? You've been staying late so much recently." "Just tired. You know how these server upgrades can be. Long hours, technical problems, late nights staring at screens until my eyes burn. Well, make sure you're getting enough rest. We have such a busy few weeks ahead of us with wedding preparations." She had no idea how busy things were about to become. After she left for her shopping adventure with her mother, 2 women who had elevated the art of denial and selective blindness to a spiritual practice, I returned to my laptop with the dedication of a research scientist approaching a particularly complex and potentially groundbreaking discovery. The internet, I had discovered over the years, was a magnificent thing when you knew where to look and had the patience to dig beneath the surface of obvious results. It took me exactly 47 minutes to find 2 more videos featuring our bedroom and its mysterious guest star. Same man, same time frame, different positions. Different outfits, too, I noticed, with the kind of attention to detail that had made me exceptionally good at my job debugging complex systems. She'd worn the green dress I'd bought her for her birthday in one video, the one she claimed made her feel elegant and feminine when we went to dinner at upscale restaurants. The white blouse she said was her favorite because it made her feel pure and professional appeared in another video, though she was wearing it in a decidedly unprofessional context. I created a comprehensive filing system that would have impressed my project management professors back in college. Video timestamps cross-referenced with my work travel schedule and documented business trips. Screenshot comparisons showing consistent camera placement and lighting setups that indicated professional preparation. Metadata analysis revealing file creation dates, device information, upload patterns, and technical specifications that told a story of systematic production rather than spontaneous activity. My IT background proved useful for more than just debugging server crashes and explaining to confused users why their password couldn't be password 123 for security reasons. By noon, I had confirmed that our apartment had been transformed into a private studio at least 7 times over the past 4 months. The pattern was remarkably consistent. Always during weekdays when I was at work, always during the same 2-hour window between 1 and 3 p.m., always with the same production values that suggested careful preparation rather than spontaneous passion. The man appeared to be a freelance photographer named Cole Barnes, judging by the professional camera equipment visible in several shots and his poorly secured social media accounts that featured the kind of artistic photography that looked suspiciously similar to the lighting techniques he'd employed in our bedroom. Cole had an interesting and diverse portfolio posted on his professional website: engagement photos for happy couples, headshots for aspiring actors and models, and what he discreetly advertised as intimate lifestyle photography for adventurous couples seeking artistic expression. His rates were posted right there on his website with the transparency of a legitimate business: $500 for a 2-hour session, additional fees for special circumstances, location rental, and exclusive content creation. Clara had been thorough in her deception, but not particularly smart about digital footprints and online security. Then again, most people weren't. They assumed that deleting browser history and clearing text messages was enough to hide their activities, not realizing that metadata was forever, and cloud backup services had extremely long memories. When she returned that evening with 3 potential dresses, each one whiter and more elaborate than the last, as if the amount of white fabric could somehow compensate for other deficiencies in the purity department, I helped her hang them in our closet with appropriate enthusiasm and supportive comments about how beautiful she would look. We discussed flowers and catering arrangements while I mentally calculated how many people would witness what I was already planning with increasing clarity and determination. The photographer wants to do some engagement photos next week, she mentioned while we were eating dinner, her mother's chicken casserole recipe that involved enough cream and butter to feed a small congregation. Nothing fancy, just some shots around town for the church bulletin and maybe the local paper. What photographer? I asked, cutting my chicken with mechanical precision. Someone Dad recommended. He does a lot of work for church events and community celebrations. I felt my pulse quicken with anticipation. What's his name? Cole something. Cole Barnes, I think. I nearly choked on my food, but managed to maintain my composure. Cole Barnes? You know him? The name sounds familiar from somewhere. Where do you know him from? She focused intently on cutting her chicken into perfectly even pieces, displaying the kind of concentration typically reserved for delicate surgical procedures. I don't really know him personally. Dad arranged everything. Said he gives the church a significant discount for community service. That's generous of him. Very generous. Dad says he's committed to supporting traditional family values. I watched her navigate the conversation with the skill of someone who'd had considerable practice discussing Cole Barnes without revealing too much information. What kind of photos is he thinking? Just standard engagement shots. Maybe some at the church, some in the park, some casual ones around town to show our connection to the community. Sounds very traditional. Exactly. Nothing too modern or artistic. Interesting word choice, given Cole's professional specialty. Evan, she said that night as we lay in our bed, the same bed that had starred in her unauthorized film festival, I need to tell you something important. My heart rate didn't change. I'd been expecting this conversation since the moment I'd recognized our wallpaper in that first video. What's that? Sometimes I worry that my past might, I don't know, come back somehow. Before I found my faith again, before I met you and understood what real love meant, I made some mistakes. I turned to face her in the darkness, studying her profile against the moonlight streaming through our crooked curtains. What kind of mistakes? Nothing serious, just youthful indiscretions, things that seemed important at the time but that I regret now. I appreciate your honesty, I said. What specifically are you worried about? She was quiet for a long moment, and I could almost hear her calculating exactly how much truth she was willing to reveal without completely destroying her carefully maintained image. Maybe it's nothing. Pre-wedding nerves. You know how brides get. Tell me anyway. I want to understand what's worrying you. I'm just concerned that someone might try to cause trouble for us. Someone from my past who might not want to see me happy and settled. What kind of trouble? I don't know exactly. Spreading rumors, telling stories, trying to make me look bad in front of our families and the church community. I reached over and took her hand, feeling her fingers tremble slightly against mine. Clara, whatever happened before we met doesn't matter to me. I love who you are now. She squeezed my fingers with the desperation of someone who knew she was lying and hoped I was too naive to notice the inconsistencies in her story. You're so understanding and patient. Most men wouldn't be this forgiving. Most men don't get to marry the daughter of a priest, I said. I consider myself blessed. She fell asleep 20 minutes later, her breathing evening out into the rhythm of someone with a clear conscience, or at least someone who'd convinced herself she had one. I lay awake until dawn, listening to her breathe and planning the most memorable wedding ceremony our small town had ever witnessed, with the methodical thoroughness I brought to complex technical projects. The following week, I became a dedicated student of my own fiancée, not in any romantic sense, but in the methodical way a scientist studies a particularly interesting specimen under carefully controlled laboratory conditions. Clara followed patterns with the precision of someone who understood that consistency was the foundation of effective deception. Coffee at 7:30, prepared with exactly 2 spoonfuls of sugar and a careful measure of cream that never varied by more than a few drops. Morning prayers at 8, kneeling beside our bed for exactly 15 minutes while reading from a leather-bound devotional her mother had given her for Christmas 3 years ago. The book was filled with inspirational messages about purity, faithfulness, and the rewards of patient virtue. Work at the church office from 9 to 5, helping her father with administrative duties that seemed to involve a surprising amount of time away from the actual church building. I'd always assumed she was filing paperwork, organizing events, or visiting parishioners, but now I wondered what those long absences really entailed. Dinner at 6, always something traditional and wholesome, pot roast on Mondays, chicken casserole on Wednesdays, fish on Fridays, in deference to some Catholic influence she'd picked up somewhere along the way. The kind of meals that suggested a woman who spent her days contemplating domesticity, rather than whatever it was she actually spent her days contemplating. Evening devotional at 9, Another 15-minute session with her prayer book, where she'd read aloud if I was present, her voice taking on the kind of reverent tone typically reserved for scripture and wedding vows. Bed by 10:30, usually after asking me to pray with her for God's blessing on our upcoming marriage and our future children. But patterns, I discovered over the course of careful observation and detailed documentation, had exceptions that were far more revealing than the patterns themselves. On Tuesday, she claimed to be visiting sick parishioners, but returned with takeout from a restaurant across town, a detail she tried to hide by transferring the food to our own plates before I got home from work. The problem was that she'd forgotten to dispose of the evidence. A receipt wedged between the car seats that showed a purchase time 3 hours later than her supposed return from visiting the sick. The receipt was from a restaurant that was nowhere near the hospital or any of the elderly church members who might require pastoral care and comfort. On Thursday, she said she was attending a prayer meeting that lasted 4 hours, unusual for a group that typically met for 90 minutes and had never, in my experience, required enough divine intervention to extend their schedule by nearly 3 times their normal duration. When I casually asked about what had taken so long, she claimed they'd spent extra time praying for troubled marriages in the community, which seemed like an interesting choice of focus given our upcoming wedding. I didn't confront her about these inconsistencies. Instead, I did what any reasonable person would do when faced with irregularities in data patterns. I checked our shared cell phone account with the thoroughness of a forensic analyst. The billing statements were illuminating in the way that only dry, technical documentation can be when you're looking for specific information and know how to interpret the data properly. Text messages to numbers I didn't recognize, sent during times when she claimed to be in prayer or meditation. Data usage spikes on days when she insisted she was disconnected from worldly distractions to focus on spiritual preparation for our marriage. Location services that pinged cell towers nowhere near where she said she'd been, creating a digital map of deception that even a novice investigator could follow with minimal effort. But my favorite discovery was a recurring charge for something called studio space rentals, $150 every other Friday for the past 6 months, automatically debited from the checking account we'd opened together to save for our wedding expenses. The irony wasn't lost on me that our future together was being funded in part by her alternative career activities. I called the number during my lunch break, pretending to be interested in renting space for family photos. Studio space rentals, this is Janet, a cheerful voice answered on the second ring. Hi, I'm looking to rent a private location for some personal photography. Nothing professional, just intimate family shots. We have several options available, Janet replied with the practiced enthusiasm of someone who'd answered this question many times before. Are you looking for something discreet? Extremely discreet. Well, our most popular package includes a residential setting, fully furnished bedroom, living room, kitchen, very authentic looking. Most clients use it for lifestyle shoots. Lifestyle shoots? You know, couples, artistic photography, adult content. We don't ask questions as long as everything's legal and consensual and the security deposit clears. We've been in business for 8 years and pride ourselves on absolute privacy. I asked about rates and availability, gathering information with the thoroughness of someone genuinely interested in their services. Our premium package is $200 for a 4-hour session, Janet explained. That includes full access to the residential suite, basic lighting equipment, and guaranteed privacy. Most of our clients are professionals who need authentic settings for their work. What kind of professionals? Photographers, videographers, content creators. People who need realistic domestic environments for their projects, but don't want to use their own homes for obvious reasons. I thanked Janet and hung up, adding another piece to the puzzle that was becoming clearer with each new discovery. Our apartment wasn't just Clara's home, it was her workplace. And apparently, it wasn't even her only workplace. She'd been paying for professional studio space while also using our bedroom for her film projects. That evening, I suggested we go out for dinner to celebrate our upcoming nuptials and the fact that we'd managed to survive another week of wedding preparations without any major disasters. "Where would you like to go?" Clara asked, adjusting her cross necklace with the nervous gesture that had become more frequent lately. "Somewhere special. Maybe that new place across town? I heard they have excellent pasta and a wine list that's supposed to be impressive." She hesitated for just a moment. A barely perceptible pause that might have been nothing or might have been everything. "Actually, I've heard mixed reviews. The service is supposed to be slow and the prices are ridiculous. How about Giuseppe's instead?" Giuseppe's was 3 blocks from our apartment. Safe territory. Familiar ground where she could control variables and minimize the risk of unexpected encounters with people who might know too much about her extracurricular activities. "Perfect," I said, making a mental note to research the new restaurant's customer base and see if any of them might be connected to Cole Barnes or his professional network. During dinner, I watched her navigate the conversation with practiced ease, discussing wedding preparations and her father's sermon series on marriage while carefully steering away from any topics that might require specific details about her daily activities. "I'm grateful we waited," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand with fingers that trembled slightly. So many couples rush into physical intimacy and lose the spiritual connection that makes marriage sacred. "Absolutely," I agreed, studying her face for any sign that she recognized the irony of her statement. The anticipation makes everything more meaningful. She smiled radiantly, the expression reaching her eyes in a way that suggested she'd almost convinced herself her own words were true. "Exactly. Our wedding night will be perfect, because we've honored God's plan for purity." I nodded and signaled for the check, wondering if Cole Barnes had been part of God's plan, or if that was a separate theological category that required different documentation. "Evan," she said as we walked back to our car, "do you ever worry about our future together?" "In what way?" "I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if we really know each other as well as we should before making such a big commitment." I unlocked the car and held the passenger door open for her. "What don't you think I know about you?" "Maybe it's not about what you don't know. Maybe it's about what I don't know about you." "Such as?" "You're so calm about everything, so methodical. Sometimes I feel like you're always thinking several steps ahead of everyone else." I started the engine and considered her observation. "Would you prefer if I was more spontaneous?" "Not spontaneous exactly, just more emotional maybe, more unpredictable. I can be very unpredictable when the situation calls for it." She laughed, but the sound had a nervous edge. "When have you ever been unpredictable?" "You'll see," I said, and meant it more than she could possibly imagine. The breakthrough came on a Wednesday morning when Clara's phone buzzed during breakfast with the distinctive sound she'd assigned to text messages from her prayer group leader. She glanced at the message, and her face shifted almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression that might have been guilt or excitement or both, but definitely wasn't the peaceful contentment of someone receiving spiritual encouragement. "Prayer group emergency," she announced, grabbing her purse with the kind of urgent efficiency that suggested this particular emergency was expected rather than surprising. "Mrs. Henderson's husband is in the hospital." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, spreading jam on my toast with deliberate casualness. "Should I come with you? I could drive you there and wait in the lobby, maybe help coordinate with other church members." "No need at all. It's women only today. We'll be praying and planning meal rotations for the family during their difficult time." She kissed my forehead with lips that felt warmer than usual and left in a hurry that seemed inconsistent with the methodical pace typically required for meal planning and prayer coordination. I waited exactly 15 minutes, long enough for her to reach her supposed destination if she was actually going to the hospital, then drove there myself. Mrs. Henderson was in the cafeteria, eating apple pie and reading a romance novel, looking remarkably healthy for someone dealing with a spouse in medical crisis. Her husband was playing checkers with another patient near the window, moving pieces with the steady hands of someone whose biggest health concern was whether the hospital coffee was strong enough to keep him awake during visiting hours. I approached their table carefully, wearing my most concerned expression, and hoping I looked like a devoted future son-in-law, fulfilling his Christian duty. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm Evan, Clara Whitmore's fiancé. I heard about the emergency, and wanted to see if there's anything I can do to help." She looked genuinely confused, the kind of bewilderment that suggested she had no idea what emergency I might be referring to. "Emergency? What emergency, honey?" Clara said Mr. Henderson was hospitalized with something serious, something that required immediate prayer intervention from the women's group. "Oh, sweetie, he's just here for his weekly physical therapy session, same as every Wednesday for the past year since he threw his back out working in the garden. Nothing urgent about it. The doctor makes him come in for exercises and stretches." Mr. Henderson looked up from his checkers game and waved cheerfully. "Tell Clara thanks for thinking of us, but I'll be home in time for dinner and Wheel of Fortune." I thanked them both and left, another piece clicking into place with the satisfying precision of a well-designed system finally operating as intended. That evening, Clara returned home at 6:30 with red cheeks, slightly messed hair, and the kind of glow that suggested her prayer session had been more physically demanding than usual spiritual activities typically required. "How's Mr. Henderson?" I asked, not looking up from my laptop where I was pretending to review work emails while actually organizing my growing collection of evidence. "Much better, thank God. The doctors are cautiously optimistic about his recovery." "That's wonderful news. What exactly was wrong with him?" She paused in the middle of hanging up her jacket, her hand frozen on the coat hook, like she was suddenly unsure of her next move. "Heart complications. Very serious, but the prayer circle worked miracles." "Amazing what faith can accomplish," I said. "I should visit him tomorrow after work. Bring flowers, maybe some of those cookies he likes." "Oh, no need for that. He's being transferred to a specialized facility in another city. Very sudden decision by the medical team based on his complex needs." "That's unfortunate. Which facility?" I'm not entirely sure of the name. The arrangements happened quickly and the family is handling all the details privately." 3 lies in 30 seconds. A personal record, even for someone with Clara's demonstrated skill in creative storytelling. That weekend, I told Clara I needed to visit my college roommate in Indianapolis, a man named Tommy who had actually moved to Seattle 2 years ago for a software engineering job. But she had no way of knowing that detail since she'd never shown any interest in my friends or my past beyond what was necessary for polite conversation. "I'll miss you terribly," she said, looking appropriately sad while helping me pack an overnight bag with the kind of attention to detail that suggested she wanted to make sure I had everything I needed for a trip I wasn't actually taking. "I'll miss you too, but it's just one night, and Tommy's going through a rough divorce. He needs someone to talk through his feelings." Of course, male friendship is so important, especially during difficult transitions. I drove exactly 12 miles out of town, checked into a roadside motel with reliable Wi-Fi access, and used their internet connection to monitor our apartment building's security cameras through an app I'd installed months earlier for completely legitimate security purposes. At 2:47 p.m., a silver sedan pulled into our designated parking space with the confidence of someone who'd made this trip many times before. Cole Barnes emerged first, carrying a professional camera bag and a tripod case that suggested this wasn't a social visit. Clara appeared 30 seconds later, looking around nervously before following him toward our building entrance. She was wearing the blue dress I'd complimented just last week, telling her how beautiful she looked when we went to dinner with my parents. They spent 3 hours and 14 minutes in our apartment, longer than any legitimate photography session would require, but exactly the right duration for the kind of content creation I'd observed in the videos. They left separately, Clara departing first after what appeared to be a brief argument near the doorway. She looked upset, gesturing emphatically while Cole remained calm and collected. Cole followed 10 minutes later, loading his equipment into his car with the casual efficiency of someone finishing a routine workday. At 6:15 p.m., Clara texted me, "Missing you already. Spending quiet evening with scripture reading and reflection on our upcoming marriage." I screenshot the message and added it to my growing evidence folder, which had become impressively comprehensive and well-organized. Sunday morning, I returned from my fictional trip with appropriate gifts and stories about Indianapolis, carefully crafted to be boring enough that Clara wouldn't ask for too many details or remember them if she did. "How was your quiet evening?" I asked, while unpacking my bag and putting away the souvenirs I'd actually purchased at a gas station 20 minutes from our apartment. "Peaceful and restorative. I read the entire book of Psalms and felt very connected to God." "That's beautiful," I said. "Which psalm spoke to you most powerfully?" She hesitated, clearly trying to remember any specific psalm from her supposed marathon reading session. "All of them, really. It's hard to choose when the entire collection works together as a symphony of faith." "I understand completely. Sometimes the whole is greater than the sum of its parts." She smiled and hugged me tighter than usual, clinging with the desperation of someone who suspected their time was running out, but wasn't sure why. "I love how spiritual you are, Evan. We're going to have such a blessed marriage." "I'm counting on it," I said, and I meant every word in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. 3 weeks before our wedding, I made a decision that would have surprised my former self. I was going to give Clara exactly what she deserved. Not violence, not public humiliation for its own sake, not revenge driven by emotion or wounded pride or any of the dramatic motivations that fueled the stories I'd seen in movies and read in books. Just truth, delivered with perfect timing and maximum impact. The plan required the kind of systematic precision that my IT background had prepared me for over years of complex project management. Every variable needed to be controlled, every outcome predicted, every backup system in place. This wasn't about anger or hurt feelings. This was about information management and strategic presentation of data. First, the technical requirements. Our church had installed a new projection system 6 months earlier, specifically for the youth ministry's multimedia presentations. High-definition capability, wireless connectivity, and most importantly, accessible through any laptop with the right adapter. I'd helped install it myself, volunteering my time and expertise for what Father Richard had called the Lord's work in the modern age. How providential that turned out to be. Second, the evidence needed to be irrefutable and professionally presented. I spent my lunch breaks cataloging every video, every timestamp, every technical detail that proved premeditation rather than spontaneous weakness. This wasn't about a woman having a past. This was about a woman actively maintaining a double life while planning a marriage built on deliberate, systematic deception. The difference mattered, both legally and morally. Third, the delivery had to be surgical. No screaming, no dramatic accusations, no emotional outbursts that would make me look unstable or vindictive. Just facts, presented clearly, at the moment of maximum impact when the largest possible audience could witness the truth. I purchased a wireless HDMI adapter and tested it thoroughly with our home projector, running multiple connectivity tests to ensure seamless operation. The connection was perfect, the video quality was excellent, the audio was crystal clear. Clara noticed my improved mood during this period, but attributed it to pre-wedding excitement and the natural happiness of a man about to marry the woman he loved. "You seem different lately," she observed one evening as we addressed wedding invitations with the careful penmanship that would be our guests' first impression of our celebration. "More relaxed." "I'm excited to start our life together," I said, which was technically true from a certain perspective. "Are you nervous at all about the wedding?" "About what specifically?" "Marriage. It's such a big step. Sometimes I wonder if we really know each other well enough." I looked up from the invitation I was addressing to her great-aunt in Wisconsin, A woman who'd driven 8 hours to attend our engagement party and would undoubtedly drive 8 hours back for the wedding. What don't you think I know about you? She was quiet for a moment, her pen hovering over an envelope. Maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe I'm wondering if I know enough about you. What would you like to know? I don't know. Sometimes you seem so calm about everything, like you're always thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I considered this assessment. Would you prefer if I was more impulsive? Not impulsive, exactly, just more emotional, maybe. More unpredictable? I can be unpredictable, I said, returning to my careful handwriting. She laughed, the sound slightly forced. When? You're the most methodical person I know. You'll see. 2 weeks before the wedding, Cole Barnes made an appearance that complicated my timeline and forced me to accelerate certain aspects of my planning. He showed up at our apartment on a Saturday afternoon while Clara was at the church, helping with flower arrangements for Sunday service. I answered the door to find a man matching the description from his social media profiles. 35, average height, professionally casual in the way that suggested he worked in media or real estate, or one of those fields where appearance mattered more than substance. Is Clara here? He asked, looking past me into our apartment with the familiarity of someone who knew the layout intimately. No, she's at church. Can I help you with something? He studied my face carefully, probably comparing me to whatever description Clara had given him. You're the fiancé. I'm Evan, yes. And you are? Cole Barnes. I'm a photographer. I've worked with Clara on some projects. What kind of projects? He smiled in a way that was probably meant to be charming but came across as slightly predatory. Artistic photography. Portfolio development for her modeling aspirations. I see. She hasn't mentioned any modeling aspirations to me. It's been very private. Selective clientele. High-end artistic work. I opened the door wider, gesturing for him to come in. Would you like to come inside? I'd love to hear more about Clara's artistic interests. He declined, backing away from the doorway with the nervous energy of someone who'd realized this conversation wasn't going according to plan. I'll catch up with her later. Should I tell her you stopped by? Actually, maybe don't mention it yet. I wanted to surprise her with some prints from our last session. What kind of prints? But he was already walking toward his car, moving faster than the casual conversation warranted. I watched him drive away, then immediately called Clara at the church. How are the flower arrangements coming along? I asked. Beautiful. We're using white lilies and baby's breath for the altar, just like we discussed. Perfect. By the way, did you ever mention to me that you've done any photography work, portfolio development? The silence stretched longer than normal phone delays typically accounted for. Why do you ask? Someone just stopped by asking about it. Said he was a photographer who'd worked with you on some projects. I did some headshots last year for the church directory updates. Nothing serious or professional. This guy seemed to think it was more involved than that. Said something about selective clientele and artistic work. I have no idea what he meant by that. Some people like to exaggerate their importance to make themselves sound more successful. His name was Cole Barnes. Do you know him? Another pause, this one even longer. The name doesn't ring a bell immediately. Interesting. He seemed to know you pretty well. Knew our address, knew your schedule. People in creative fields network constantly, Evan. I might have met him at some church event or community function. That must be it, I agreed. Well, he said he'd catch up with you later about some prints. Evan, is everything okay? You sound strange. Just excited about the wedding. 2 weeks feels like forever when you're this ready to start your married life. She laughed, sounding relieved. I love you. I love you too, Clara. More than you know. That evening, she was unusually affectionate, almost aggressively so. She cooked my favorite dinner without being asked, suggested we watch a romantic movie instead of the news, and spent considerable time during dinner discussing how much she valued honesty and communication in relationships. Promise me something, she said, as we were falling asleep that night. What's that? Promise me that if you ever have doubts about us, about anything, you'll talk to me first before making any big decisions. I turned to face her in the darkness, studying her profile against the streetlight filtering through our curtains. What kind of big decisions? I don't know. Just promise me you'll communicate with me before doing anything that might affect our future. I promise, I said. Will you make me the same promise? Of course. So if you had any secrets, anything that might affect our marriage, you'd tell me now rather than let me find out later? She was quiet for so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. Yes, she finally whispered. I would tell you. I squeezed her hand gently. I'm glad we understand each other. The next morning, I finalized my preparations. 1 week before our wedding, everything accelerated with the momentum of a carefully planned project reaching its implementation phase. Clara's father announced during Sunday service that Channel 7 News would be filming portions of our ceremony for a feature story about traditional weddings in small-town America. Apparently, the novelty of a priest's daughter getting married in her father's church during peak wedding season constituted human interest news worthy of regional television coverage. Isn't that wonderful? Clara asked afterward, though her expression suggested she found the prospect more nerve-wracking than wonderful. We'll be on television. It's perfect, I agreed, and meant it with every fiber of my being. The television coverage would provide additional documentation that my evidence wasn't fabricated or manipulated, a concern I'd anticipated from the beginning of my planning process. Having professional cameras recording the church service would eliminate any doubt about authenticity and provide multiple angles of the events as they unfolded. That same day, I received a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. It's about Clara. I recognized Cole Barnes immediately when I met him at a coffee shop across town, far enough from our usual haunts to avoid accidental encounters with anyone who might know either of us. I think you know why I'm here, he said, sliding into the booth across from me with the nervous energy of someone who'd spent considerable time rehearsing this conversation. Enlighten me. Clara told me about your conversation last week, about the photography work. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching steam rise from the surface. She finally remembered you. Look, I don't want any trouble. What happened between Clara and me was consenting adults making private decisions about their own lives. I'm not disputing that. He seemed surprised by my calm response, probably expecting anger or threats or the kind of emotional outburst that would give him leverage in negotiations. You're not angry? Should I be? Most guys would be furious. I'm not most guys. What exactly do you want, Cole? He leaned forward, lowering his voice even though we were the only customers in the coffee shop. I want to make sure those videos don't surface anywhere public. They could ruin Clara's reputation, her father's career, everything she's worked to build. What videos? Don't play stupid. I know you've seen them. I met his stare directly, keeping my expression neutral. Where would I have seen them? The internet. They're out there on multiple sites. Are they? You know they are. I pulled out my phone and opened a browser window. Show me. He shifted uncomfortably, realizing he'd revealed more information than he'd intended. They might have been taken down recently. By whom? Look, I'll pay you. Whatever you want. Just promise me this doesn't become a problem for anyone. How much? $5,000, cash, no questions asked. I considered this offer while taking another sip of coffee. What makes you think I have any control over what becomes a problem? Because you're about to marry her. You have the most to lose if this comes out publicly. Or the most to gain? His face changed, confusion replacing confidence. What do you mean? Nothing. Just thinking out loud. I stood up, leaving money on the table for my coffee. I need to get going. Wedding preparations, you understand? Wait, do we have a deal? I looked down at him, this man who'd spent months filming adult movies in my bedroom with my fiancée while I worked to support our future together. Cole, I don't make deals with people who don't have anything I want. What do you want? I smiled for the first time in our entire conversation, feeling genuinely amused for reasons he couldn't possibly understand. I want a memorable wedding. I left him sitting there and drove home to find Clara pacing our living room with the kind of agitated energy that suggested Cole had already called to report on our meeting. We need to talk, she said the moment I walked through the door. About what? I know you met with Cole. He told you? He called me, completely panicked. Evan, I can explain everything. I sat down on our couch, the same couch that had appeared in the background of several videos, and gestured for her to join me. I'm listening. She perched on the edge of the cushion, hands twisted in her lap like she was preparing for a confession that might save her soul or damn it forever. Before I met you, I was in a very dark place spiritually. I made choices that went against everything I'd been raised to believe. What kind of choices? I let Cole convince me to make some videos. Private videos for his artistic portfolio. How private? Very private. Intimate in ways that I'm ashamed to even think about now. I nodded encouragingly. Go on. But that was before I found my faith again, before I met you. Before I realized what love and commitment really meant. How many videos? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Does it matter? It might. Several, maybe more than several. Where were they filmed? Here, in our apartment. When? She started crying, tears that looked genuine and probably were. Recently, even after we got engaged. But Evan, I was trying to end it. I was trying to get Cole to delete everything and walk away clean. By making more videos? I thought if I cooperated one last time, gave him what he wanted, he'd give me all the files and we could move forward with a clean slate. I handed her a tissue from the box on our coffee table. Did he give you the files? He said he did, but obviously they're still out there somehow. Obviously they're still accessible somewhere, I agreed. She nodded miserably. I'm so sorry. I know I should have told you sooner. Yes, you should have. Are you angry? I considered the question seriously, analyzing my actual emotional state rather than defaulting to what would be expected. I'm disappointed. That's worse than angry. Maybe it is. She moved closer to me on the couch, desperate for physical contact that might bridge the growing distance between us. What can I do? How can I fix this? Can you? I'll do anything. Cancel the wedding, leave town, whatever you want. I looked at her tear-streaked face, her desperate expression, her genuine panic at the thought of losing everything she'd built on a foundation of systematic lies. I don't want to cancel the wedding. You don't? No. I want to have the most honest ceremony possible. Relief flooded her features like sunrise after a long, dark night. Yes, completely honest. I'll tell my father everything if that's what you want. That won't be necessary. It won't? No, Clara. I think honesty is something that should be shared with everyone who cares about us. What do you mean? I stood up and kissed her forehead gently, the gesture feeling strangely like a benediction. I mean, our wedding is going to be exactly what it should be. A celebration of truth. She looked confused but hopeful, probably interpreting my words as forgiveness rather than the promise they actually were. I love you, Evan. I know, I said. And after Saturday, everyone else will know exactly who they're loving too. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather and terrible timing for anyone hoping to postpone the inevitable. I woke before dawn, not from nerves, but from the kind of anticipation that comes when months of careful planning finally reach their implementation date. Clara slept beside me, peaceful and trusting, probably dreaming of white dresses and forever promises and all the other romantic notions that seemed reasonable when your life wasn't built on systematic deception. She'd insisted on staying at our apartment the night before, despite her mother's protests about tradition and bad luck. "I want to wake up next to you one last time as your fiancée," she'd said, which would have been touching if it weren't for the layers of irony involved. By 7 a.m. I was showered, dressed in my rented tuxedo, and reviewing my final checklist with the thoroughness of a project manager preparing for the most important presentation of his career. The wireless HDMI adapter was hidden inside the altar flower arrangement, exactly as planned, invisible among the white lilies and baby's breath that Clara had chosen for their symbolic representation of purity and innocence. My laptop was loaded with a carefully edited compilation, just enough content to make the point without turning our church service into an adult theater screening. I'd chosen the clips for maximum impact and minimum vulgarity, focusing on timestamps and clear facial recognition rather than graphic details. The television crew arrived at 8:30, setting up cameras and testing audio levels with the efficient professionalism of people who'd covered thousands of small-town events. The producer, a woman named Janet who looked like she'd graduated from local news to regional features, interviewed Father Richard about the significance of family traditions and community values. "There's something special about a father performing his daughter's wedding ceremony," she said to the camera with practiced sincerity. "It represents the passing of responsibility from parent to spouse, the completion of a sacred circle." Father Richard nodded gravely, wearing his most photogenic expression of paternal wisdom. "Clara has always been the light of our family. Pure of heart, devoted to her faith, an example to other young women about the rewards of patience and virtue." I watched this interview from the church vestibule, adjusting my tie and wondering if irony could be measured in standard units of literary device. Clara arrived at 9 with her mother and 2 sisters, a parade of white fabric and nervous energy that drew appreciative comments from early arriving guests. She looked genuinely beautiful, radiant in the way that only brides and lottery winners can manage, wearing the kind of dress that had probably been featured in bridal magazines as the perfect choice for traditional ceremonies. "You look perfect," I told her during our brief moment alone in the church hallway. "I'm so nervous," she admitted, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her veil. "About what?" "Everything. The cameras, the crowd, starting our new life together." "Don't be nervous about our new life," I said. "It's going to be exactly what we both deserve." She smiled and kissed my cheek carefully to avoid smudging her lipstick, which had been applied with precision that suggested professional consultation. "I love you. I love you too, Clara, more than you'll ever know." By 10:45, the church was full. 237 people, according to my quick count from the vestibule. Family, friends, curious neighbors, and the television crew documenting this celebration of traditional values for their human interest segment about small-town America. The organ began playing at exactly 11 o'clock, filling the sanctuary with the traditional wedding march that had soundtracked thousands of ceremonies just like this one, except for the unique element I was about to introduce. Father Richard took his position at the altar, wearing his most formal robes and the expression of a man about to perform the most important ceremony of his career. This wasn't just any wedding, this was his daughter's wedding, being broadcast on television as an example of everything their community represented. The bridesmaids processed down the aisle in their pale pink dresses, followed by my groomsmen in matching tuxedos. Everything proceeded according to traditional protocol, exactly as we'd rehearsed the night before. Then Clara appeared in the doorway with her mother, and the entire congregation stood in unison. She was a vision of everything a small-town wedding should represent: innocence, beauty, hope, tradition. Her dress was vintage lace with a cathedral train that required 2 flower girls to manage properly. Her veil was her grandmother's, something borrowed that connected her to generations of family tradition. Her bouquet was white roses, and baby's breath, symbolically pure. She walked down that aisle like she was floating, eyes fixed on me with absolute trust and love, and all the confidence of someone who believed their secrets were safely buried. I watched her approach and felt something I hadn't expected. Genuine sadness for the woman she could have been if she'd made different choices along the way. But she hadn't made different choices, and choices, I'd learned over the past few weeks, had consequences that couldn't be avoided indefinitely. When she reached the altar, her father stepped forward to perform his pastoral duties with the dignity of a man who'd spent his entire life preparing for this moment. "Dearly beloved," Father Richard began in his most resonant pulpit voice, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God and this congregation to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony, which is an honorable estate instituted by God and signifying the mystical union between Christ and his church." The congregation settled into their pews with the comfortable rustle of people preparing to witness something beautiful and sacred. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly," Father Richard continued, warming to his favorite theme, "but reverently, discreetly, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God." I glanced at Clara, who was glowing with happiness and probably thinking about the reception dinner and the honeymoon we'd planned for next week. Then I looked at the television camera, which was recording every word for posterity and regional broadcast. The bond of marriage was established by God in Eden and confirmed by Jesus Christ, and is declared by Paul to be honorable among all people. It is therefore not to be undertaken lightly, but thoughtfully and reverently, with due consideration for the purposes for which it was ordained. Father Richard paused and looked directly at his daughter, with the kind of paternal pride that would have been touching under different circumstances. "Clara has been a blessing to our family and our congregation from the day she was born. She embodies the virtues of purity, faithfulness, and devotion that make a marriage strong and lasting." This seemed like the appropriate moment for my contribution to the ceremony. I stepped slightly forward and addressed the congregation in a clear, calm voice that carried to every corner of the sanctuary. "Father Richard, before we proceed with our vows, I'd like to share something with everyone who came to celebrate with us today." The priest looked surprised, but nodded encouragingly, probably assuming I wanted to say something romantic about Clara or thank the guests for attending. "Of course, son." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone, connecting it to the wireless adapter I'd hidden in the flower arrangement earlier that morning. The connection established immediately, exactly as I'd tested dozens of times. "I believe marriage should be built on complete honesty," I announced to the congregation, with the kind of calm authority I used for technical presentations at work. "So I want everyone to see exactly who they're witnessing unite in holy matrimony." The projection screen behind the altar flickered to life with crystal-clear, high-definition video. For about 3 seconds, there was absolute silence as people processed what they were seeing. Then the gasps started, followed by exclamations, followed by the kind of chaos that erupts when 200 people simultaneously realize they're witnessing something unprecedented. The audio quality was excellent, thanks to our church's investment in a superior sound system that picked up every detail with crystal clarity. Clara's face went white as communion bread. "Evan, stop this right now." "Why?" I asked with genuine curiosity. "These are beautiful memories. Very artistic. Cole did excellent camera work, don't you think?" Father Richard stared at the screen in horror as his daughter performed acts that were decidedly not covered in any premarital counseling curriculum he'd ever studied. "Turn it off!" Clara screamed, lunging for my phone. "Turn it off right now." "But we haven't reached the best part yet," I said, advancing to a particularly athletic sequence that demonstrated impressive flexibility. This was filmed 3 weeks ago, while we were addressing wedding invitations together. The congregation had moved beyond gasps into full pandemonium. Some people were standing to get a better view, others were covering their eyes with hands that shook from shock, Several elderly parishioners looked like they might need immediate medical attention, and at least a dozen phones were recording everything for social media posterity. Mrs. Whitmore had turned completely pale and was gripping the edge of the pew so tightly her knuckles were white. Clara's sister was crying into her hands, while Clara's aunt was frantically trying to shield her young children's eyes from the projection screen. The television crew kept filming with professional dedication, their cameras capturing every moment of what would undoubtedly become the most watched local news segment in the station's history. Father Richard found his voice, though it came out higher than his usual authoritative pulpit tone. You planned this entire thing deliberately." "I planned to marry an honest woman," I replied, with the calm precision of someone delivering a technical presentation to confused clients. This seemed like the most efficient way to determine if that was actually possible. Clara lunged for my phone again, but I stepped back easily, keeping the device safely out of her reach while the video continued playing on the sanctuary's high-definition screen. "The timestamp is right there in the corner for everyone to verify," I pointed out helpfully to the congregation. 3 weeks ago, 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, I was at work, earning money for our honeymoon and wedding expenses, while Clara was earning money in our bedroom through alternative revenue streams. "You're completely insane," Clara sobbed, her carefully applied makeup running down her cheeks in black streaks that made her look like a melting portrait. "You're absolutely psychotic." "Actually, I'm methodical," I corrected, with the patience of someone explaining a technical concept to a confused user. "There's a significant difference between the two, though I understand the confusion." Father Richard's face had progressed through several color changes and settled on a shade of red that suggested potential cardiovascular concerns. His hands were shaking as he pointed at the screen, where his daughter continued her performance with enthusiasm that clearly hadn't been forced. "Clara," he said, in a voice that carried to the back of the church despite the ongoing chaos, his words ringing with the kind of biblical authority he typically reserved for sermons about eternal damnation. "Tell me this is some kind of horrible mistake. Tell me this isn't real." She looked at her father with desperate eyes, then at me, then at the 200 people staring at her in various states of shock, disgust, moral outrage, and morbid fascination. "Daddy, I can explain everything." His hand moved faster than anyone expected, especially considering his age and typically gentle pastoral demeanor. The slap echoed through the church acoustics like a gunshot, cutting through the murmur of voices and gasps of surprise with sharp finality. Clara stumbled backward, holding her face, and for a moment, the only sound was the organ music, which was still playing the traditional wedding march in an increasingly surreal backdrop to our very non-traditional domestic drama. "You've destroyed everything," Father Richard said to his daughter, his voice carrying the kind of biblical authority and paternal disappointment that would haunt her for years to come. "Our family name, our reputation in this community, our church, everything we've worked to build over decades of faithful service." "I tried to stop," Clara wailed, her voice breaking with genuine despair that might have been touching if it weren't so perfectly timed. "I tried to end it before the wedding." "By making more videos?" I asked, advancing to the next clip in my carefully curated compilation. "Because based on the timestamps and metadata analysis, your efforts to end things looked remarkably similar to your efforts to continue and expand things." Mrs. Whitmore, who had remained frozen in the front pew like a marble statue of maternal horror, finally found her voice. "Clara, how could you do this to our family? How could you betray everything we taught you?" "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Clara sobbed, dropping to her knees in her expensive wedding dress among the scattered rose petals from her bouquet. "It was supposed to be over. He promised me it would be over." "Who promised you?" Father Richard demanded, his pastoral instincts taking over despite his personal devastation. "Cole. He said if I did one more session, just one final video, he'd delete everything and we'd never have to see each other again." "And you believed him?" I asked with genuine curiosity. After months of evidence that he wasn't exactly trustworthy? The crowd was getting restless, with some guests standing to leave, while others pushed closer to get a better view of the continuing drama. The television producer was making frantic hand signals to her crew, probably torn between journalistic gold and potential lawsuits. I ejected my phone from the adapter and slipped it back into my jacket pocket, ending the video presentation now that everyone had seen enough to understand the complete situation. The projection screen went dark, but the damage was comprehensive, permanent, and perfectly documented. Ladies and gentlemen, I addressed the congregation with the same calm professionalism I brought to client presentations and technical training sessions. Thank you for attending what was meant to be a celebration of traditional marriage values. I hope this educational experience has been illuminating for everyone involved. I started walking toward the aisle, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor that Clara had walked down just minutes earlier as the blushing bride. Then I paused and turned back to Father Richard, who was still staring at his daughter with the expression of a man watching his entire world-view collapse in real time. For what it's worth, Reverend, your daughter is extraordinarily talented in her chosen field. I'm sure she'll find her true calling and appropriate career path eventually. I turned to Clara one final time, looking down at her where she knelt in her ruined wedding dress, among the scattered rose petals from her bouquet and the fragments of her carefully constructed life. For richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, I said, borrowing from the vows we'd never get to exchange in the traditional manner. Mostly poorer now, I imagine, but that's the beauty of honest assessment. The congregation erupted into fresh chaos as I walked down that aisle, past 200 shocked faces, past the still-rolling television cameras, past the life I'd thought I wanted, and toward whatever came next. The organ music finally stopped. Behind me, Clara was screaming my name, begging me to come back, promising she could explain everything if I'd just give her one more chance to make things right. But I'd heard enough explanations to last several lifetimes. I pushed through the church doors into the bright Saturday sunshine, got into my car, and drove away from the most honest wedding ceremony our small town had ever witnessed. The radio was playing soft jazz as I merged onto the interstate, heading toward a future that suddenly looked much more interesting than anything I'd planned with Clara. In my rearview mirror, the church grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely behind a curve in the road. I drove for 6 hours before I stopped for gas at a roadside station somewhere in the next state. While I was filling the tank, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Wedding ceremony goes viral after groom exposes bride's secret life, video already trending on social media. I deleted the alert without reading the full article. Some stories, I'd learned, tell themselves better than anyone could plan them.